This week, a mountain of energy, a solar sea, and some rather unusual food. Hey, welcome to Click. Hope you're doing okay. I don't know about you, but this year has felt really quite long so far. We live in a world which is unrecognisable from even 6 months ago, and it's clear that we still have big problems to face. But let's not forget the global issues that we were talking about even before the pandemic, particularly climate change. Now, possibly one silver lining from all this is the reminder that tech can and does solve some of our biggest problems. And on Click, we've been lucky enough to see some amazing tech that can change the world and yeah, even revolutionise it. So we thought we'd share with you some of our favourites from the past couple of years. And we start, where else, but in Wales. The beautiful Welsh countryside, home to valleys, lakes, the odd feral goat, and Electric Mountain. Hidden inside this mountain is the Dinorwig Pumped Storage Power Station, and it is basically a monster battery. It stores energy by pumping water from this lake to a lake at the top of the mountain and then letting it flow back downhill, releasing that energy at times of peak demand. See, when you pop the kettle on during breaks in championship matches of that sport they call football, this bad boy springs into action to supplement our national grid, delivering power to our homes in under 12 seconds. It's an incredible view. It's one of the fastest responding power stations on the planet, and we'll have a nosy inside the thing later in the programme. Dinorwig offers a semi-renewable energy solution at a time when our natural resources are being used up. As solar, wind and tidal power alternatives advance, we're craving a method of using their generated energy 24/7, despite the weather or time of day. And this is where batteries come in. Now, this isn't your stereotypical battery. Admittedly, when I say battery, you probably think of the ones in these. These are rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, and we really can't live without these. Lithium-ion batteries have truly revolutionised electronics. They power the mobile miracles that we use every day. They have a high density, meaning they can store a lot of electricity relative to their small size, so we can easily carry them around and we can recharge them hundreds of times. Inside cells are layers of sheets stacked together, a positive cathode, negative anode with a separator in between, filled with a liquid electrolyte. When a cell is discharged, the movement of ions from one side to the other facilitates the flow of electrons, which then generates current to power devices. During charging, this process is reversed. But the search is on for cleaner, greener forms of energy. And for that, Lara sailed to a very special island just off Norway.
We've travelled west now to Os, Norway. It is so calm here, it's absolutely beautiful. But not far from here, the waves can reach up to 3 metres. And that's where we're heading, because we're going to go and take a look at an island which is made up of solar panels. And the idea is that they need to fare okay, whatever the weather. Oh, thank you. I've made it. Wow, we're walking on water. These certainly aren't the first floating solar panels, but the innovation being tested here is the fabric itself, creating a cost-effective, weather-resistant material that could easily be scaled. There's talk of a setup near the equator the size of a football pitch. This has been designed to withstand wind, rain and ice, but round the edges these barriers prevent any seawater from getting in. So whilst you can see I'm standing in a pretty large puddle right now, that's from last night's rain. What I'm actually standing on is less than 1 millimetre thick, and it really feels that it's quite hard to stay balanced. It's made from polyester coated in a polymer. And what makes this polymer special is how lightweight yet strong it is, meaning it's ideal for this type of installation.
In not that distant future, we think we can build systems that are comparable with the so-called ground mount installations on land, and that will be a big breakthrough for photovoltaics, because then you have suddenly large surface areas where you can build cheap renewable energy very close to large consumer groups.
And making use of just a fraction of the sea's vast surface area, as well as taking advantage of the water's ability to keep the panels cool, means that the scaling of this does seem plausible. The solar power being harnessed is being used here on this fish farm. Now, the island has been developed to be the exact right size to harness the right amount of power in the summertime. That's presuming that the weather's good. The rest of the year it's running on diesel, so obviously you can see the environmental benefits of this. But the suggestion is that an island this size, if anchored in the London area, could power 20 average UK homes. Make the island the size of a football pitch, and that could rise to 200. But of course the investment needed is huge, so moving forward on this could prove more complicated than the proof of concept.
Back at De Norwig, I'm heading deeper underground. The water comes from the lake, which is about 600 metres above us, down this pipe, hits this valve and stops. This is the biggest tap you will ever see, and there are actually 6 of them all in a row down there. When they need the power, this yellow arm swings up, the valve opens, and we get some maximum flow of water through to the turbines through there in about 6 seconds. When all 6 are open, that's 92,000 gallons per second. Or as it says here, 1.5 million cups of tea. Oh my God. Not sure if that's Earl Grey or English breakfast, right? Do we have flow? Do we have flow? We have flow. And there it is, turbine number 2, spinning at about 500 RPM. And when all 6 of these turbines are all spinning, this place produces enough electricity to power the whole of Wales for 5.5 hours. Now, De Norwig runs at about 75% efficiency because it pumps its water uphill at night using cheap electricity it buys from the national grid and charges a premium for the energy it generates during the day. If we were to move completely away from fossil fuel power stations, would that mean that this sort of power station wouldn't be able to run?
In reality, yeah, if we need to pump that water up the hill, we've got to go and buy that electricity from the market somewhere, whether that is a thermal power station, a set of windmills, a gas power station, whatever it might be.
Why are there not more of these around?
I suppose the greatest challenge is finding a suitable place in the UK to build them. You know, you've seen yourself that you've got to have them in a specific area. It's got to have 2 lakes. The 2 lakes are ideally reasonably close together, good vertical separation. You know, they're not the kind of things that you can easily sort of build on the back of a wagon and wheel them in somewhere. You know, those lakes need to exist, or you need to create them, so it comes with cost. So I think it's just a limited amount of options in terms of locations for such places.
Yeah. Cool. You a bit lonely down here?
Sometimes.
Hello and welcome to the Week in Tech. It was the week that President Donald Trump joined TikTok's rival app, New York-based Triller, gaining 11,000 followers in his first 2 days. A decision to award A-level students final grades on the basis of an algorithm was reversed by the UK government following protests, and Apple became the most successful US company ever, worth over $2 trillion. It was also the week that scientists at the University of Delaware said they developed a coating that could ease the interface between humans and artificial intelligence. The new material is a type of polymer known as PDOT. It could help create future cyborgs by more easily connecting electronics to human tissue. A team of researchers at the University of Michigan has revealed a new rechargeable zinc battery that could provide energy to robots in a similar way to a human's fat cells. The new design will help build capacity in robots as they become smaller and will help in applications like drones. An autonomous boat has completed a 22-day mission, mapping a part of the seafloor of the Atlantic Ocean. The 12-meter-long uncrewed surface vessel was developed by SeaKit International. It was skippered from a base in eastern England, and the mission was part funded by the European Space Agency. And finally, how handy would it be to have a chameleon tongue-like robot Snatcher to reach all those faraway objects? This robot has been developed by a team at Soltech to help collect items without getting too close. The tongue works fast and can snatch up to 30 grams from 80 centimeters away in under 600 milliseconds.
I want to share with you a fact that I hadn't fully understood until I met climate scientist Ed Hawkins last year. Now, I'd known that our weather was getting worse and our sea levels were rising, and I'd known that global warming was happening because we were emitting carbon dioxide and methane into the air at a runaway rate. But what I hadn't fully understood is this. Simply reducing greenhouse gas emissions will not bring global warming under control. In order to stop global warming, we need to do something very drastic indeed.
If we end up in a world where our emissions are net zero and we're not increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere anymore, then that will stabilise global temperatures at the point at which we do that.
No, that's not realistic, is it?
To reduce global temperatures, we would need to somehow remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Now, there are already ways of capturing CO2 at source, on its way out of power stations, for example. But this doesn't get it all by any means. What you need is something to pull CO2 back out of the air. What you need is something like this. It's called the artificial tree. The air passes through these filters, which are made of a very special material, because the CO2 actually clings to this material as the air passes over it. Now, once these filters are saturated with carbon dioxide, this whole thing moves down into a container of water, where this particular material releases the CO2 into the sealed container. And then, congratulations, you've captured yourself some CO2 from the air. This is the brainchild of Klaus Lackner here at the aptly named Negative Emissions Center at Arizona State University.
They realized very early on this is a waste management problem. We are dumping CO2 into the atmosphere and it just stays there. So it was very clear to me in the early 90s that sometime in the 21st century we will have to stop emitting.
Klaus was the first scientist back in 1999 to publish a scientific paper suggesting carbon capture from the air was a feasible way of combating climate change. The problem was, no one seemed to be listening.
If you look at the climate change problem, in the 90s we had models which told us it's happening, but you couldn't really see it out in the real world except with a microscope. In the 2000s, you could measure it. It was happening. In the teens, now you can see it happen even as a non-expert. Climate has changed. In the next decade, as it grows out of the noise, it becomes loud and clear and it starts to hurt. And once it hurts, people will say, now what do we do about it?
Klaus argues that since we're failing to meet our targets for lowering CO2 emissions, carbon capture from the air is now unavoidable. And now people are listening. His technology has recently received commercial investment.
We have put so much CO2 in the air that we actually have to come back. So we call ourselves the Center for Negative Carbon Emissions because we are actually thinking about having a period in this century in which we will have to take 100 parts per million back. Now, that's more CO2 than the world emitted in the 20th century.
How many of these do you think we would need?
A lot. Now, these are very small, but go to the size of a shipping container. If you wanted to actually match current emissions, you would need 100 million of them. Now, these are bigger than this, right? But 100 million sounds like a horribly large number until you start deconstructing it. We build 80 million cars and trucks a year. Shanghai Harbor is sending out about 30 million full shipping containers every year. So I would argue, as far as industrial scale goes, this is large, but not outrageously large.
Making that piece was absolutely fascinating, and it really helped me to think about the different approaches that we can take to tackling the different aspects of climate change. So, as well as removing our emissions from the air and using greener energy techniques, we can, of course, also reduce the energy that we use and reduce the emissions produced by certain industries. Now, one of the big ones is agriculture and meat production. And over the past few months, both Kate and Lara have been looking at alternatives to the food that we eat.
At Beyond Meat in LA, they've designed the next generation of meat substitute by analysing it at a cellular level. They then went hunting through the plant kingdom for enzymes, fats and proteins that behave in the same way as the elements of the meat. In this case, extracted from peas, potatoes and with beetroot for blood.
I know it's not meat, and I'm going to taste it soon, but just from the juice, it feels like a burger.
As well as the visual appeal, scientists here use an e-nose to examine the components of aroma so they can be mimicked in the lab.
I'm just going to do it the way you do a burger. Straight on in, try and... Oh, it's oozing all over my fingers. And you know what, Ethan? It's dripping down my hands and oozing in a very burger-like way.
You look at the amount of water we use 99% less water. If you look at the amount of energy used, we use about half the energy. If you look at the emissions that we provide, we're about 90% fewer emissions, right? And then lastly, on land, and this is a really important one for the farmer, we use 93% less land. So if you're a farmer and you have 100 acres, you can now grow on 7 acres what you used to use all 100 for.
There is still one major drawback for your average meat-loving family. Where a pack of fresh beef burgers might be priced around £4.40 per kilogram, the Beyond Meat alternative is currently around £24 for the same weight. This burger substitute is 100% vegan, but while vegetable substitutes struggle to recreate the effect of meat, there is one company who have decided to just grow it in a lab. Farms are creating what's known as cultured meat, which is grown using animal cells. This meat doesn't fill up any agricultural land with gas-emitting livestock, and no animals need to be slaughtered.
We use less resources, less input to feed the cells than needed to feed the animal, but also addressing the issues of animal welfare, the issues of the use of antibiotics, which is one of the key drivers for developing the superbugs, meaning resistance to antibiotics.
The potential for creating a more sustainable way to feed the planet is huge. But again, the price at around £2,000 per kilogram right now puts this way outside regular household food budgets. There is also the not-so-little matter of getting approval from food safety authorities before you can even think about selling it, which could take years. For many, switching to a meat-free diet is partly about sustainability and partly about better health. But beyond the marketing hype, are these heavily processed foods actually achieving either goal?
With cultured meat, you are in many cases trading off reduction of methane for potentially substantial increases in the CO2 emission.
I mean, there's a lot of debate and uncertainty around if highly processed food is intrinsically bad for you or not.
Actually look at what is done to that food on the way to you and how much energy is added to it in the course of processing and how many pollutants are produced. That's an essential thing.
There is still a long way to go to produce an effective meat substitute that is both delicious and affordable. But with a third of Britons already stating they lead a mainly vegetarian life, it's a booming market attracting a lot of investment to design the perfect meat replacement.
To make the whole food industry more sustainable, we're also going to need to broaden our diets. So I've come here to Copenhagen to visit IKEA's Research and Development Lab Space 10 to see what they have in mind.
What we're exploring in our test kitchen is not necessarily going to end up in IKEA restaurants any day soon. Our starting point is really how do we feed 10 billion people in a sustainable manner and without compromising deliciousness.
What am I having?
Today you're having our dogless hot dog.
A dogless hot dog.
We use carrots instead of sausages.
Okay.
Which we have poached in a mixture of apple juice and carrot juice. And then we have dried them in the oven for about 1.5 hours. So they shrink in and they get like this chewy kind of texture to them. Kind of like meat in a way.
A lot of what we have come up with is plant-based because we know that turning to a vegan diet is simply the most sustainable thing you can do as an individual. But besides that, we need some protein. And there we have explored everything from insects, not only because they're environmentally friendly, but also because they are delicious. We have explored microalgae or spirulina. The only challenge with spirulina is that it tastes like algae. So we really try to find ways of how can we actually make this taste good.
We're gonna start off by putting this puree or paste of pumpkin seeds. We're just gonna put that in the bottom of the hot dog. Then we're gonna add the carrot and our beetroot ketchup.
So time for a tasting.
You like it? Yeah.
It doesn't taste like a normal hot dog,
No.
but it tastes a lot better. I would never be eating a normal hot dog.
Think so? Oh, thank you.
The flavour of all the sauces, there's just so many different tastes in there, and they're all quite intense. Okay, it's a bit messy eating on camera, but beyond the ingredients, IKEA is also hoping to reduce its carbon footprint, introducing hydroponic farming in all stores. This method creates the perfect environment for growing plants using their food waste as fertiliser. But we could all be getting a bit more creative with our waste, it seems. Take leftover ground coffee for a start.
Because you only use 1% of the nutrients in the coffee grounds when you make a cup of coffee, we actually use some of our coffee grounds for shortbreads and others for growing oyster mushrooms.
Will there be caffeine in them? Will they keep me awake?
I actually don't know, but I don't believe so.
That's it from us and our look back at some of our sustainable favourites and a reminder that tech really can change the world. Next week, we'll give you another chance to look at some of our other recent adventures. In the meantime, you can catch us on social media on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at BBC Click. Thanks for watching and we'll see you soon.